In 1914, Europe plunged into a war unlike anything the world had seen. But across the Atlantic, the United States made a different choice: stay out of the conflict and remain neutral. For nearly 3 years, Americans watched the fighting from a distance. President Woodrow Wilson strongly supported neutrality, while American trade continued across the Atlantic. Wilson was re-elected in 1916 while emphasizing that America had stayed at peace. But beneath that neutrality, pressure was already building. Then Germany's submarine campaign began changing the equation. American ships could now face danger at sea, and neutrality was becoming harder to defend. Then, in May 1915, a British passenger liner entered waters that had become increasingly dangerous. Its voyage would soon change American attitudes toward Germany. German U-boats were operating around the British Isles, threatening ships entering waters Germany had declared a war zone. On May 7, 1915, the Lusitania was struck by a German U-boat off Ireland. The disaster killed nearly 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. The sinking caused enormous anger across the United States. But even this tragedy did not immediately bring America into the war. Wilson still sought to keep the nation neutral. For a time, Germany restrained its submarine campaign after American protests. But by early 1917, German leaders made a dramatic decision: unrestricted submarine warfare would return. Now, submarines could target ships entering designated war zones, even when those vessels belonged to neutral nations. American shipping was suddenly at greater risk. American merchant vessels were no longer simply crossing the Atlantic. Every voyage carried the possibility of confrontation with Germany's submarine fleet. The American government now faced a difficult choice. Staying neutral was becoming harder as German submarines threatened American ships, trade, and lives. Then, in January 1917, Germany sent a secret diplomatic message. Its destination was Mexico, but its real target was the United States. Germany proposed that Mexico join an alliance if America entered the war. In return, Germany promised support for Mexico's claims to lost territory. British intelligence intercepted the communication and worked to decode it. What they uncovered would soon become one of the war's most explosive diplomatic revelations. When the Zimmermann telegram became public in March, Americans learned that Germany had considered encouraging a conflict on America's own southern border. Across America, the revelation spread quickly. Newspapers brought the secret proposal into homes and onto streets, intensifying public suspicion of Germany. The issue now felt different. Germany was no longer seen only as a distant power fighting in Europe. Its actions appeared increasingly connected to American security. America also had deep economic connections with Britain and France. American businesses were supplying the Allies with food, materials, weapons, and financial support. By early 1917, several pressures were converging: submarine attacks, diplomatic threats, economic ties, and growing public anger. American neutrality was weakening. Then, in early 1917, revolutions shook Russia. The old imperial government collapsed, and Tsar Nicholas II was removed from power. For President Wilson, this created an important political change. One of America's potential partners was no longer ruled by the Tsar. Wilson could now describe the Allied side in broader terms: a struggle involving democratic government against powerful authoritarian empires. The revolution did not decide the issue by itself. But it removed one obstacle, while Germany's submarine campaign continued pushing America toward a decision. On April 2, 1917, Washington waited for a decision that could change America's role in the world. President Wilson was about to address Congress. Wilson asked Congress to recognize that Germany's submarine campaign had made neutrality increasingly impossible. He called for America to enter the war. Congress now faced the question that Wilson had brought before the nation: should the United States abandon neutrality and formally enter the European war? After debate and deliberation, the decision was made. America was about to cross the line from neutrality into open war with Germany. On April 6, 1917, the United States officially declared war on Germany. After nearly 3 years of neutrality, America had entered the First World War. The news spread rapidly across the country. The debate over neutrality was over. America now had to transform from a neutral nation into a wartime power. But declaring war was only the beginning. America had to build an army, train its soldiers, organize supplies, and prepare to send them across the Atlantic. Soon, American soldiers would cross the Atlantic. Their arrival would give the exhausted Allies fresh manpower, supplies, and financial strength. Across the Atlantic, American troop transports carried fresh soldiers toward Europe. The journey was long, dangerous, and strategically important to the Allies. When American troops began arriving in France, they brought something the exhausted Allies urgently needed: fresh manpower and the promise of much more to come. America was no longer sending only money and supplies. By 1918, a rapidly expanding American force was preparing to fight on the Western Front. The Americans were becoming a new force on the Western Front. Their growing presence gave the Allies confidence during the war's final and most exhausting stage. America's impact was not limited to soldiers. Its enormous industrial capacity could produce food, equipment, materials, and supplies on a scale the exhausted Allies desperately needed. Across France, railways, ships, trucks, and supply depots connected American resources with the Allied armies. Logistics became a weapon of endurance. And every month, more Americans arrived. Their growing numbers meant the Central Powers faced an opponent whose military strength was still increasing. By 1918, the strategic balance was changing. Germany faced a coalition that was exhausted, but now backed by a rapidly growing American presence. In 1918, Germany launched a major offensive in the West, hoping to break the Allied position before American strength could fully arrive. But American formations were increasingly ready for combat. Fresh troops were entering the fighting while the German army was already under enormous pressure. During the final Allied offensives, American forces played an increasingly important role. Their presence added pressure at a moment when Germany was running out of options. By November 1918, Germany agreed to an armistice. The First World War was ending, and America's intervention had helped shape its final chapter. America did not enter World War I because of a single event. Several pressures had been building for years, until neutrality became increasingly difficult to maintain. German submarine warfare threatened American shipping. The Zimmermann telegram raised fears of a wider threat. And public opinion was turning sharply against Germany. Once America entered, the country mobilized on an enormous scale. Soldiers, factories, ships, supplies, and money began moving toward the European battlefield. By 1918, American forces were fighting in Europe. The nation had tried to stay outside the conflict, but the war had finally pulled America in.